Destruction does not always arrive in chaos. It does not need the thunder of voices or the violence of flame. Often, the truest form of destruction moves in silence, deliberate, invisible, unseen, until the ground beneath one's feet has already shifted. This is the discipline of psychological warfare. This, Ralph Waldo Emerson would say, is not the path of fury or revenge. It is the art of composure, the mastery of stillness, control, and the quiet strength of self-command. Most imagine that victory demands confrontation, exposure, shouting, drama. But in doing so, they fall into the very trap laid before them. The moment you react, you surrender the frame. The moment emotion takes the wheel, the adversary takes the power. Emerson taught that true strength does not clamor. It breathes calmly in the midst of noise. Power does not perform. It observes. The one who needs to prove himself already stands defeated. Think of those moments when someone sought to provoke you. A smirk disguised as humor, a public insult thinly veiled as jest. The instinct is to defend, to justify, to retaliate. But what if instead you met it with silence? What if you looked them in the eye, not with anger, not with hurt, but with calm certainty? What if your stillness itself became the statement? That is the first weapon in Emerson's arsenal, stillness. Stillness is not weakness. It is the calm of the mountain that does not tremble for passing storms. It is dominance wrapped in restraint, the refusal to let another's chaos penetrate your peace. When others unravel and you remain steady, the power dynamic in the room changes. Without a word, the atmosphere bends toward you. The one who remains silent commands attention, not by force, but by presence. Imagine someone tries to embarrass you before others. Their weapon is spectacle. Their goal is to make you react. They crave the validation of your outrage. But what happens when you give them nothing? You do not flinch. You do not defend. You simply breathe, pause, and then continue, as if their words are weightless air. In that moment, you have said everything that matters. You are not worth my disturbance. The crowd senses it. They feel the shift. Without explanation, they now see who stands anchored and who flails for control. Your silence becomes a mirror. It reflects their desperation. The more they speak, the more hollow their voice becomes. The more they explain, the guiltier they appear. And the louder they shout, the smaller they seem. Emerson once wrote that peace cannot be achieved through argument. It is a victory of the soul. He understood that those who argue for their worth reveal its absence. Let them speak. Let them burn their own fire to ash. You need not attack. You need only withhold oxygen. And when the fire no longer feeds on your attention, it collapses under its own hunger. They wanted war. You offered stillness. They wanted a scene. You gave serenity. And in that contrast, you unveil truth itself. Power is not in reaction, but in restraint. Stillness redefines the battlefield. Most fight like children, quick, loud, desperate to be seen. But the wise play a deeper game, slow, deliberate, invisible. Chess against those still playing checkers. You do not silence their words. You erode their identity. For the secret desire of every provocateur is not to wound, but to control the story about you. They wish to script your downfall, but Emerson teaches you lose the narrative only when you consent to it. The moment you refuse to participate in their drama, you strip them of authorship. You remove the one resource they cannot survive without, your cooperation in your own destruction. Now the audience begins to see clearly. They start to ask, why does this person keep attacking? Why this obsession with someone who never responds? Doubt begins to shift its allegiance. The aggressor's mask slips. Victory arrives quietly, not through confrontation but through revelation. You let them defeat themselves. Their noise exposes them. Your calm exposes the truth. Emerson knew that the most commanding man in the room is not the loudest. It is the one who radiates such peace that no insult can find a place to land. That is the first lesson, the weapon of stillness. But once you master silence, you discover a deeper power, subtraction. because sometimes victory requires not the defense of space, but the removal of your presence from it. Once you deny your adversary the reaction they crave, you begin to remove something more essential: your energy, your attention, your availability. The air that sustained their relevance begins to thin. This, Emerson would say, is the second discipline, the art of subtraction. Destruction need not be explosive. Often it is the quiet unthreading of influence, the deliberate removal of what once sustained imbalance. It is not about what you add to the battle, it is what you quietly take away. You stop feeding the system that no longer deserves you. No warning, no farewell, only absence. The instant you withdraw, those who thrived on your reaction begin to suffocate. It doesn't happen all at once. It begins invisibly, like twilight fading into night, and by the time they notice, the light is gone. People who manipulate do not feed on power. They feed on connection. They feed on the tension between their cruelty and your attention. Withdraw that energy, and the walls of their illusion begin to crack. Picture this: a colleague, a rival, a friend in disguise, this spinning rumors, twisting truth, staging small betrayals for an audience. Most people would chase the story, desperate to clear their name. But in doing so, they look frantic, they look guilty. Emerson would smile at this folly and say, "The wise man wastes no words on falsehood. He makes truth visible. You do not chase the whisper. You silence it by being untouchable. You stop explaining. You stop defending. You simply subtract. You become unavailable to the noise, and suddenly they panic. At first, it is subtle, quiet inquiries cloaked in concern. Are you okay? Why so silent? But beneath it lies fear, because your absence is not emptiness. It is charged with power. They can no longer predict you, no longer access you, no longer manipulate you. Your stillness, once a pause, becomes a wall. Emerson said that a man is rich in proportion to what he can afford to let alone. And this is your wealth, the strength to walk away without anger, to subtract without noise, to disappear not in defeat, but in transcendence. You stop giving them access to your time, your thoughts, your movements, and in that void, they begin to reveal themselves. The louder they talk, the more desperate they appear. The harder they grasp, the faster they fade, because the one who speaks most appears weakest, and the one who builds in silence commands destiny. Now we go deeper into subtraction, refining its edge and purpose. Subtraction is not merely absence. It is a surgical choice. It is the precise removal of what allows an adversary to live in your orbit. It is refusing to be the fuel that keeps their small conflagration burning. When you withdraw deliberately, what you create is not emptiness, but a vacuum that reveals the true mechanics of influence. Consider how influence works. Presence is currency. Your time, your attention, your reactions, these are forms of payment. To those who traffic in manipulation, your responses are coin. Subtraction is counter-economics. You stop paying. You stop validating the currency. Over time, the market collapses because those who lived off you discover there is nothing left to buy. This is the higher strategy. Remove yourself from their stage and watch what remains. When you are absent, those who relied on your visibility must invent drama to remain visible themselves. They amplify their noise. They manufacture spectacle. In that theater of desperation, they reveal their methods, and others begin to perceive the pattern. What once seemed like a series of attacks becomes a single portrait of insecurity. There is an important distinction to make. Subtraction is not muteness. It is not the same as retreating into a shell and doing nothing. Subtraction is a redirection of force. You stop reacting publicly and instead build privately. You reallocate your energy to work that grows your influence in rooms they cannot enter. While they attempt to provoke, you execute. Imagine the simple acts of subtraction. You stop answering provocative texts. You stop attending the contrived gatherings where your name is bait. You cease to retweet or repost the rancor they manufacture. You stop giving them occasions to perform. You behave as if their stage does not exist. even as you go quietly about creating a superior stage of your own. This is subtlety turned into steel. The more you move into your inner work, the less they can find purchase against you. They become increasingly exposed because their narrative depends on the very reactions you deny them. Without this feed, their elaborate construction begins to wobble. There is strategy in silence, and there is craft in disappearance. Remove the scaffolding that props up their influence. The invitations you once extended, the favors you once granted, the access you once allowed. Each withdrawn invitation is an economy recalibrated. Each absent reply is a ledger adjusted. Let them discover the new balance sheet. Do not mistake visibility for vulnerability. Subtraction builds a fortress of competence. While they cry for attention, you build alliances, sharpen skills, and produce undeniable work. Your presence becomes a scarce resource that others seek because you are not constantly accessible. Scarcity breeds value. Value breeds autonomy. Use subtraction to reframe relationships. If a colleague sows rumor, do not answer every whisper. Instead, deepen your ties with those who matter quietly and reliably. Build a portfolio of trust that stands outside the theater of gossip. You will find that as your work and ties compound, the whisperer's reach shortens. There is an advanced approach to subtraction that deserves clarity. Surgical subtraction. This is not indiscriminate absence, but a conscious reduction of specific levers: time, information, endorsement. Cut off access to your calendar, to your private conversations, to channels through which they manipulate public perception. Do not make proclamations. Make choices. Let your actions be precise and unannounced. That is the elegance of the tactic. When you withdraw, you will see predictable phases in your adversary's behavior. Initially, there is confusion, then irritation, then escalation. They may attempt to create crises to force a response. Resist. Escalation is the signal of failure. The louder the protestations, the thinner the substance. If they persist, they will begin to undermine themselves in plain view. A second advanced technique: erase their name from the present tense of your life. Never speak of them in a way that keeps them alive in your narrative. When a person is spoken of constantly, they remain real in the social imagination. Omit their name. If mentioned, respond with neutral brevity. I haven't been in touch. That simple phrase performs tremendous work. It withdraws drama and projects indifference. Indifference practiced with integrity is not cruelty. It is sovereignty. Subtraction is not a moral failing. It is a strategic moral clarity. You choose what to attend to. You choose the field on which you will apply your labor. If their game requires your attention to exist, then your refusal to supply it is a moral correction. You are not harming yourself. You are reclaiming time and energy that belong to your life's tasks. You will witness the crowd's perception shift. Observers will begin to note the contrast between your calm productivity and their frantic spectacle. That contrast is the crucible in which reputations are reforged. While they consume their own resources in an attempt to provoke, you accumulate influence and deliver results. The difference becomes self-evident. This brings us to the next strategic instrument: exposure through contrast. Once you have mastered stillness and subtraction, you can deploy an even more powerful move. Live so fully and consistently that your life contradicts every lie told about you. Let your existence be evidence. Contrast is simple in theory and difficult in execution. It requires consistency. While they manufacture narratives of your supposed failings, you embody the opposite through steady action. If they claim arrogance, respond with generosity that is neither performative nor showy, but quiet and methodical. If they smear your competence, let your work be unimpeachable in result and common in practice. If they whisper manipulation, commit to radical clarity, document your decisions, publish your methods, show the integrity of your process. The genius of contrast is that it does not attack, it illuminates. Lies are fragile against steady truth. The one who loudly accuses often must invent complexity to sustain the accusation. Your consistent presence, day after day, outcome after outcome, collapses that complexity into simple reality. People see the dissonance, the accusation on one side, the lived evidence on the other. Which is more persuasive? The one who yells, or the one who quietly produces tangible proof? There is a deeper psycho-political effect of contrast. It forces observers to reconcile cognitive dissonance. Humans prefer narrative simplicity. When contradictory narratives sit side by side, observers will adjust the story to fit the evidence that holds up best under scrutiny. Over time, the recurring evidence of your character and competence wins the argument that words tried and failed to carry. Contrast can also be anticipatory. By understanding the narratives your adversary tends to deploy, you can preempt them. If they aim to paint you as arrogant, prepare an act of humility that is visible but not ostentatious. If they plan to accuse you of incompetence, launch a public, verifiable demonstration of skill. In this way, you own the frame before they attempt to take it. You steal their thunder not with counterattacks, but with preemptive, truthful display. Let me be explicit. This is not about cynically curating an image. It is about aligning your life to reality so tightly that falsehoods cannot lodge. Authenticity is the most efficient weapon. When your actions are consistent with your claims, rumor cannot anchor itself in the minds of those who observe. Contrast must be used with humility. Avoid the temptation to swagger. The aim is not to humiliate the adversary, but to provide such consistent proof of your integrity and competence that their falsehoods lose oxygen. People are drawn to steady truth. They tire of spectacle. Your task is to become steady in ways that matter. We now turn to a quieter, more treacherous theater, the shadow game. Some enemies will not quarrel openly. They will whisper, conspire, and orchestrate small blows from behind the curtain. These adversaries are insidious because they work in the seams of trust, softly, surgically, and without attribution. The response must be a different kind of mastery. Do not meet the shadow with the spotlight. Shadows retreat when confronted by light. Your strategy is to increase the luminosity of your presence in places where shadows move. Speak clearly in meetings. Publish your work openly. Make your processes visible. The whisperer depends on opacity. Transparency is the antidote. When they slander, document. When they obscure, clarify. When they misrepresent, be the living record of what you did and why. This does not require drama. It requires traceable evidence. Keep notes, keep timelines. Share results in contexts that are public and repeatable. The shadow cannot sustain itself where the light is steady and objective. Another crucial move, convert their obsession into their downfall. Every whisperer builds a narrative that requires constant reinforcement. Let them keep reinforcing it. Their continued effort will expose their motives. Once their pattern is visible, who they conspire with, what methods they use, their circle will begin to doubt. Allies will distance themselves. Their credibility will erode. A central principle to remember: respond with visible excellence, but not with personal retaliation. The shadow thrives on reaction. When you instead offer performance and transparency, you force the shadow to choose between continuing the whisper or retreating to avoid exposure. Either way, the whisper loses potency. Now consider imitation, a form of flattery that masks aggression. Imitators attempt to steal your place by copying contour without inventing engine. When imitation appears, it is not a compliment in the world of power. It is an attempt to colonize your influence. The correct response is to accelerate and transform. Never stand still. When they copy a pattern, change the pattern. Innovate faster than they can replicate. There is a tactical sequence that works well against imitators. First, refuse recognition. Do not dignify the mimic with attention. Second, diversify your expression, new projects, new platforms, new alliances. Third, amplify your originality by producing work that requires your unique combination of skill and context. Imitators can echo a style but cannot reproduce lived experience. When you speed up evolution, You leave them always chasing ghosts. The imitation trap is a mark of your potency. If someone copies you, it often means your method had merit. Use that as a lodestar. Lean into invention. Build infrastructures that are not easily replicated, exclusive collaborations, community projects, proprietary systems. These become the moat around your influence. There is also a moral dimension. Do not emulate their imitation by becoming petty or vengeful. Preserve dignity. Keep creating. The imitator, exhausted from mimicry, will reveal weakness. The longer the chase continues, the more apparent the difference between source and echo becomes. Now we approach the final and often overlooked adversary, the arrogant rival who underestimates you. Pride is brittle. Those who believe themselves invulnerable often lack the humility to see the slow, steady rise of someone they dismissed. This rival is, in effect, self-sabotaging. The path to displacing them is not a duel, but an outperformance. First, observe. Gather data on how they operate when comfortable. Listen to their private boasts and casual dismissals. This is intelligence, not malice. Second, build in silence. Quietly compound advantages, skills, contacts, deliverables. The arrogant rival expects a spectacle. Give them none. Instead, deliver undeniable value. Third, appear in their domain not to fight, but to outclass. Attend their rooms with grace. Speak with clarity. Offer proposals that solve problems rather than score points. When they expect a retort, give them a solution. When they look to belittle, present an outcome. People respond to competence. Nothing humbles arrogance like undeniable capability. This is not deception. It is moral ascendancy. You are not trying to outshout them, but to outwork and outlast them. As the tide of attention shifts to you, their voice loses authority. The applause that once inflated them recedes, and their edifice creaks. The collapse of pride is often silent. One day the room simply looks towards someone else. Victory of this kind is the most durable because it rests on competence and character. When you dismantle arrogance through craft rather than spectacle, you ensure that doors open for reasons that endure. You do not merely win a skirmish, you establish a legacy. Throughout these strategies, there is a common principle. Do less of the noise that sustains their narratives and more of the relentless work that builds your substance. Stillness, subtraction, contrast, transparency, innovation, and quiet superiority form an integrated doctrine. Each piece reinforces the others. Stillness prevents reaction. Subtraction deprives adversaries of fuel. Contrast reveals truth. Transparency exposes shadows. Innovation outpaces imitators. Quiet superiority collapses arrogance. Emerson would frame this as moral economy. He would describe power as the ethical allocation of attention. He would say that the man who governs his attention governs his fate. This is not cruelty. It is self-governance. It is the refusal to allow someone else to make the ledger of your life. Now, practical measures for execution. Keep a private log of incidents, dates, participants, claims. Use that log to guide your public visibility, not to justify ranting, but to maintain accurate memory. Build a small circle of trusted allies who can corroborate facts. Share work publicly in forms that leave a trace. Reports, posts, verifiable outcomes. Make your competence reproducible and your decisions transparent. When you operate this way, the social fabric around you reweaves itself. Trust moves toward the person who shows up with consistent value, and it withdraws from the person who shows up with only accusation. The market of attention rebalances. Reputation, once frayed, can be rebuilt through consistent action. We must also address the danger of overuse. Power that is exercised without restraint becomes spectacle. Restraint becomes performance when it is obvious. The art is to make these moves quietly and sincerely. If subtraction becomes avoidance, it fails. If contrast becomes posturing, it collapses. If transparency becomes a show, it invites cynicism. The highest form of strategy is indistinguishable from character. Therefore, cultivate interiority. Train patience as a craft. Measure your responses not by immediate satisfaction, but by long-term consequence. Ask always, which move conserves dignity and accrues influence? Choose that move. Over time, these choices compound into a life that is resistant to petty attacks and conducive to genuine achievement. Finally, maintain the moral horizon. Strategy without principle tends toward vindictiveness. Let your aim be not destruction for its own sake, but the protection of your work and the preservation of your peace. When your actions are guided by integrity, victory becomes a byproduct, not the sole goal. This completes the central body of the doctrine. In the final part, we will integrate these tactics into a narrative arc suitable for practical application. How to sequence stillness, subtraction, contrast, and adaptation. How to read the phases of an adversary's unraveling, and how to emerge with reputation intact and power consolidated. Conclude this section with a reminder: the most formidable power is not the ability to wound, but the capacity to remain whole. Emerson would advise that the soul is happiest when it rises above petty skirmishes and tends instead to its own work. In that ascension resides the deepest and most enduring triumph. In this final stage, we turn philosophy into practice, where inner mastery becomes outer victory. Ralph Waldo Emerson would call this the point of self-reliant command, where silence, subtraction, and moral steadiness transform not only how you handle enemies, but how you carry yourself through the entire architecture of life. To Emerson, the wise do not conquer by combat, they conquer by character. The mind that governs itself cannot be governed by another. Every act of composure is an act of creation, the building of invisible architecture around your spirit. You do not fight the storm, you become the mountain that holds it. Let us begin with integration, how to use stillness, subtraction, and contrast together as one current of strength. Stillness is your shield, subtraction is your sword, contrast is your illumination. Each without the other is limited. Together, they form a quiet symphony of dominance that requires no audience to affirm it. When conflict arises, the first movement is stillness. The moment provocation appears, breathe once before the noise reaches you. Reaction is the cheapest currency. Calm is priceless. Let others lose composure. Your task is to maintain temperature. Once stillness is established, move to subtraction. Withdraw the oxygen. Disengage from unnecessary entanglements. Let them realize, slowly and painfully, that their influence ends where your attention ends. This creates the psychological collapse Emerson often hinted at, the quiet demise of false authority. Then comes contrast. Not through argument, but through demonstration. You rise in competence, consistency, and grace. You respond not with fury, but with flourishing. The louder they shout, the more you shine. The difference becomes the verdict. In this way, every accusation becomes a mirror reflecting their insecurity, and every moment of your calm becomes proof of truth. Emerson would say, "The integrity of your being is the sword they cannot seize." The battlefield now shifts from external to internal. The war is no longer about them. It becomes about how deeply you understand yourself, your patience, your boundaries, your creative rhythm. The true enemy is not the provocateur outside. It is the reaction within. Master that, and the world becomes manageable. As you practice these disciplines, you will begin to sense patterns, the repeated psychology of the small-souled. The whisperer seeks reaction. The imitator seeks validation. The arrogant seeks applause. Yet all three are bound by the same weakness, dependence. They cannot exist without you. Their obsession is a form of confession. Emerson's antidote was independence, not isolation, but sovereignty. "Trust thyself," he wrote. "Every heart vibrates to that iron string. That is the sound of authority born from self-reliance. You trust your path enough to let the noise fade beneath your steps. Now we descend into application, the daily practice of this philosophy. Begin with presence. Presence is not posture. It is alignment. When you walk into a room, your calm must precede you. You do not have to speak first. Your composure does the introduction. People feel steadiness before they understand it. That sensation is influence in its purest form. Presence demands awareness of tone, gesture, breath. Speak slower than others expect. Move with intention. When attacked, never rush. The calm delay between stimulus and response is where all power lives. Next, apply subtraction strategically. Not everyone deserves access to your inner circle, your time, or your energy. Audit your connections the way an artist chooses colors, deliberately. Every conversation either refines or corrodes your focus. Choose accordingly. The art of subtraction also includes mental hygiene. Emerson believed that allowing resentment to live in the mind is to let another person live rent-free in your consciousness. Forgive not as absolution for them, but as liberation for yourself. The quieter the heart, the clearer the vision. Contrast in practice is about consistency. Every day, let your conduct quietly disprove false narratives. If they predict your fall, rise early and work twice as hard. If they accuse you of arrogance, respond with composure and generosity. You owe no explanation. Your example is the argument. Remember, perception is public, but character is private. You shape the first by cultivating the second. The audience sees only the surface, but the surface takes its shape from the structure beneath. That structure must be integrity. As you walk this path, you will notice the ecosystem of hostility begin to crumble. The whisperer's tone turns shrill. The imitator grows tired. The arrogant becomes invisible. You are not destroying them. You are simply outgrowing them. That is Emerson's doctrine of natural selection of the soul, the evolution of consciousness through self-command. But there is another layer, the one few discuss. When you rise through stillness, subtraction, and moral strength, your enemies are not the only ones who change. You do too. The need for confrontation dissolves. You begin to understand that most conflict is merely misdirected energy. You become immune to provocation because your purpose expands beyond. Emerson wrote that the great man is he who in the midst of the crowd keeps with perfect sweetness the independence of solitude. That is the essence of mastery, to remain composed not because the world is kind, but because you have learned to be the calm within. Now let's address the imitator and the arrogant rival with final precision. The last two opponents of self-reliant leadership. The imitator tries to consume your image because they cannot create their own. Their hunger for recognition betrays their lack of originality. But their imitation is your liberation because it proves that you have transcended the need to compete. You are not in rivalry with the echo. You are the sound that moves before it. How do you conquer imitation? By infinite evolution. Continue changing form, deepening depth and widening scope. The imitator cannot keep pace with motion driven by authenticity. A copy cannot outlive its source. You are not merely a creator, you are a continual creation. As for the arrogant rival, the one who underestimates you, patience is your weapon. Pride blinds the proud to slow-moving excellence. Let them underestimate. It is the most useful form of camouflage. While they boast, you build. While they rehearse applause, you prepare results. When the time comes, you will not need to announce your triumph. The world will feel it. True superiority requires no fanfare. The proud fall by comparison, not by confrontation. Here, Emerson's moral power reappears. Do your work, and I shall know you. He knew that no voice can outshout the weight of genuine achievement. Victory in this philosophy is not about destruction. It is about transcendence, rising so far above the noise that it no longer registers as sound. That is what Emerson meant by self-reliance, an inner fortress built not of ego, but of equanimity. Let us draw these threads together into one final truth. Stillness protects your peace. Subtraction reclaims your energy. Contrast proves your integrity. Innovation renews your momentum. Quiet superiority restores your dignity. When these merge, you become untouchable. You no longer react. You respond. You no longer chase. You attract. You no longer fight for position. You embody it. And in this embodiment, you discover the greatest paradox, that the most powerful strike is the absence of any strike at all. Your silence wounds arrogance. Your calm shames chaos. Your excellence dissolves envy. And your indifference to hostility becomes the ultimate judgment. You do not slam doors. You simply stop opening them. You do not retaliate, you rise. You do not fight to be heard. You speak so little that every word carries gravity. When the proud mock you, let them. When the bitter whisper, bless them. When the imitator copies, transcend them. Because while they are consumed by you, you are consumed by purpose. And purpose is the only empire worth ruling. Emerson would say, "What lies behind us and what lies before us are tiny matters compared to what lies within us. What lies within you now is power unshaken by noise, the quiet might of integrity, and the calm fire of discipline. You have not destroyed your enemies. You have disarmed them by making them irrelevant. Their noise no longer penetrates your peace. Their need for attention dies in the silence you create, and as they fade, something greater appears, the unbothered soul, luminous and self-contained, walking calmly through a world still shouting for reaction. That is true victory, the triumph of quiet superiority. The legacy of Ralph Waldo Emerson's way. Walk forward with that silence. Not the silence of avoidance, but the silence of certainty. Not the silence of fear, but the silence of mastery. The world may not understand it at first. It rarely understands peace until it's overwhelmed by its power. But one day, they will. They will see that the man who speaks little and builds much rules longer than those who roar and decay. Because power, real power, does not announce itself. It simply exists, unmovable, inevitable, eternal. Thank you for joining this journey through Emerson's silent strategies. Remember, destruction without attack is not cruelty, it is clarity. It is the choice to stay whole while others fall apart. It is the philosophy of rising through restraint. Keep your power quiet. Keep your mind sharp. Keep your presence unshakable. Until next time.